Hey, drywall repairman here. Here was a patch someone pushed against the wall. We're not going to cut this out, but we are going to clean up the fracture, tape the fracture and fill it in, then do texture. But let's go ahead and get started on this. First thing we're going to do is plastic off the area and go from there. Drywall is messy, so you always want to plastic off the area first. This plastic on the side will be for the texture, because this texture is going to spray texture. It's time to keep the overspray from going everywhere. Alright, so the fracture. I guess better lighting. You'll see the fracture, how it's cut in. What I like to do is V-notch it. V-notch it with a razor blade. Take your razor blade, cut the fracture out. Any hairline fractures, go ahead and cut them out. All it is pushed in. You can cut it out and replace the sheetrock, but it'll create more work than need be. Also, if possible, take a piece of your drywall out for the paint match. This makes a good paint match, so always keep a piece of that if you need it. I like to scrape the area out. Spray glue. Your spray glue is an optional item. It just helps the fiberglass stick better. I just do a thin layer of spray glue. That's just to fill the, just so the tape bonds better, doesn't fall off the wall. Your fracture, fiberglass mesh tape. You have other tapes out there in the market. Fiberglass mesh tape is the go-to item. We're going to basically treat this like a fracture stress crack. We're going to tape it up. Since it's going every direction, just follow a piece of fiberglass on all of it. Nothing to it. Like I said, you could have cut out a big square area and patched it in, but it's just literally just pushed in area. So we're just going to fill it in like a normal patch, and then we're going to go ahead and texture it with a spray splatter. So let's go ahead and mix some mud. We're going to do a first coat mud on it. All our fractures filled in. We don't need our hanging tools. Now we're going to start the mudding process. First coat. I like to put my hanging tools, since I didn't need no hanging tools. I need fresh water. It's a new job, so we're going to get fresh water. You need fresh water for muds. There's a hose hook up here, so I got lucky. Let that fill up. We're using hot muds. First coat mud with the hot mud. This is a 5-minute mud. First coat, we don't need much mud because we're just basically filling in this fracture crack and coating over the patch. So I only need a half a pan of mud. We use fresh water with hot muds because the fresh water won't make the mud set up faster. So just mix up a little bit. If you put too much water in, just dump it out, no big deal. Just toss and turn your mud. Mixing in the pan's the easiest way. You'll see YouTube videos, guys using special mixing tools. I even seen a guy using a gravy mixing tool, but just use a 6-inch knife. You just want to mix it up thoroughly. It is a first coat mud, so we want it mixed up thoroughly, no clumps, real heavy first coat mud. Once you get all the mud mixed in, go ahead and coat your patch quickly before the mud sets up. I'm using a 12-inch knife to coat, so 6-inch knife and a 12-inch knife go-to for any coating. Some guys like to use a 10-inch knife, 14-inch knife. Just get yourself a 10 or 12-inch knife and a 6-inch knife and a pan, and you're good to go for most projects. So let's go ahead and go inside and get that fracture pre-filled and first. So I like to strike in the tape so the mud gets inside the channel that we V-notched with the razor. So we're basically pushing the mud to get inside the gap. I just use my 6-inch knife and I'm striking it in. Now I'm pushing the mud in. Pushing the mud in. So now the mud's inside the crack that I V-notched. Now we can turn around and coat over it. We're not coating super heavy. I'm not putting a big old clump on the wall. Since this is a corner and this is wood trim, I'm just going to float the whole way over. Basically treat it like you're floating on the patch. Feather the top, feather the bottom. You can go this way, you can go that way. This way I'm going to go down the middle. Then I'll feather the bottom, feather the top. That's good enough for a first coat. Extra mud, since you're working with hot muds, like all my videos, dump your mud. Dump it where you're not going to step. You don't want to step on this wet mud and track it through the house, on the tile, on the carpet. So always dump it in an area you won't bother. If you don't want to forget, just put a piece of plastic over it. Now let's go wash your tools. This is a 5-minute mud, so it'll take 5 minutes to set up. So that gives you time to clean up your tools, let this set up. By the time we clean up our tools, come back in here, it'll start. Here I got lucky. I got a wash-up area, a hose. If you don't have a wash-up area, you're going to have to use your bucket and sponge. Nice wash-out area is always preferred with a nice garden hose. Clean up your tools right away. You don't want this mud drying on your tools because it'll set up like cement on your tools, and then you're going to have to scrape them and sand them and clean them up. So it's easier to clean your tools right when you're done coating. A hose is easier than a sponge and a bucket, but if you only have a sponge and a bucket, no hose, no problem. I like a hose because I can wash my hands. Get this mud off your hands. You don't want it on your hands. If you accidentally step on it, you can clean your shoes. Keep everything clean so we're not tracking mud back and forth, back and forth. Keep everything clean. That's the good thing about having a washout area with the hose. Let's go ahead and put our tools. While we're letting that first coat set up, we can go ahead and get our texture ready. This is a spray texture, so with the spray texture I use my joint compounds. I always put water on top of my joint compounds because I cap the mud. If you don't know what capping mud is, I have previous videos. Basically it's mud from the prior day, the prior job. I put water on it so I'm able to reuse it. Dump off the water, then remix it. I'm using a hand stomper. Hand stompers are easy to work with in the field because they don't have to run power, pull out drills, mixers, all these tools. The mud's already mixed up, so I'm just creamy, nice creamy mud. I would say like a really heavy pancake batter consistency. Mud's ready. That's a joint compound for the texture. Just keep a lid on it so nothing falls in it. Put it to the side. This is a spray texture, so I am going to need my spray setup. I know there's these spray cans on the market, the spray texture cans. Don't use those cans. You'll end up making a mess. Even the best drywallers struggle to use those spray cans. The texture's no good, it's too thin. A proper spray texture requires a spray hopper and an air compressor. This is kind of a big air compressor for this job. This is like a medium grade air compressor. Hoppers. Always use a hopper. Of course, it's a small job, so you don't want to go out and buy a $100 hopper and a $200 air compressor. But if you have someone that has one, go ahead and borrow it. If not, maybe you can find a used one. The hoppers have 3 different settings, these tips. The middle tip is always your go-to tip for most textures. Spray knockdowns, splatters. When you start doing heavier textures, you need the bigger tip. The smallest tip is mostly used for orange peels, so you really never use the small one. And the big tip you only use for really heavy textures. So the medium tip is your go-to one. I just keep that in all the time. My extra tips I keep here just in case the job I go to has different textures, so I just keep them on here on a wire. Your hopper though, when these things sit, I had it sitting, I had it sprayed with WD-40 lubricant, so you want to wash all that out before you put mud in it. Wash it all out. When you have these hoppers sit for a long time, you do want to spray them down with a lubricant, WD-40. But you don't want to put mud in with WD-40, so you just want to rinse it all out. Any debris in it, get it out of there, dirt, stuff like that. I just put it upside down until I'm ready to go. That way all the water drips out. Our next step we're going to do is a slick out our first coat. So I need my 6-inch knife and a clean sponge. This is working with hot muds. You have to slick out the technique. If we're using joint compounds, you're going to have to let them dry overnight. But let's go ahead and go inside, check on our patch, see if it's dry, slick it out, get our air compressor filled up. See, it's not fully dry, but it's starting to set up. This is when you want to work with the texture, or the mud. Your edge, you want to get rid of this edge with the sponge. That's the most important. So there's not a sharp edge. So what I like to do is get rid of the edges, any angles, and just kind of go over it. Now I'm going through and I'm troweling it down. I'm pushing down inside that fracture. It's pushing the mud into there, and you're basically taking off any extra mud. If you slick it out correctly, it's almost like a second coat that you're doing. It's not going to be perfect because this is just the first coat that you're messing with. Any deep areas, the extra mud on your knife, you could fill it in with that. You can also go the opposite direction that you coated in, any direction. I get rid of the edge again. Looks good. Your extra mud on your knife, get rid of it. Dump it. Alright, we're going to let that set up, and the time it's setting up, we're going to go mix a second coat. Second coat this whole patch, and do the same thing. Let the second coat dry, slick it out. And if it's still deep, we can do a third coat. If it doesn't need a third coat, then we can turn around and do a texture. But let's let this fully set up and go mix a second. Alright, back at the water bucket. Clean your sponge, get that first coat, slick out mud off there. Clean 6-inch knife. Our stomper, we don't need it anymore, so go ahead and clean it up. This is the beauty of using a bucket, clean water bucket. Of course, I said use clean water, that's okay. We can get it dirty for the second coat. Might even help the second coat dry faster since it's a small patch. If your water is really dirty, you can go ahead and dump it and get some fresh water, but we can still work with this mud. Second coat mud, same thing. I'm doing a 5-minute mud. It's a small patch. Notice I threw away a lot of extra mud when I did a first coat, so I'm just going to mix a little bit of second coat mud. It's just enough to do a tight coat over it. Joint compounds are different. You kind of put that mud on heavier because the joint compounds shrink back. Hot muds don't shrink back, so you don't want to put a big hump on the wall. Same thing here, mix it up. If you didn't put enough water in, go ahead and just add more. You could add it or dump it. Too much, dump it. Not enough, add a little more, no big deal. Just mix it up nice, and you're not slopping around making a big mess. You're going to try to keep the water and materials in the pan. If you're a messy worker, you can put plastic underneath you or get a mixing area under a tarp or something like that. This is a second coat, so it's not going to be as heavy as the first coat. Nice and creamy. Sometimes you can turn the pan, get the edges real good in the pan, get the corners, get it all mixed up thoroughly. It's not as heavy as the first coat, it's just a little thinner. If it's still thick, you can sprinkle in a little water, mix it more just to make it a tad bit thinner. If it's too thin, you want to add some material. You don't want to just soup. You need coating mud. That's a good second, third coat mud. Mud's mixed up, go ahead and get your coating knife. I'm using a 12-inch knife, so let's go ahead and do a second coat on that. It's really setting up now, so you can even go over the area if there's any blemishes. I could probably turn around and texture that as is, but we always do at least 2 coats on all of our jobs. Same thing here. That was first coat, this is our second coat. I like to go past my first coat edge, feather your edge, feather your edge. You can also go the opposite direction you did with the first coat. That just crosses off everything, fills in and chatters. Nothing to it. It's second coated. See, I mixed a whole lot of mud. That's okay. We're going to dump this mud. That's a 5-minute mud, so we're going to give it 5 minutes to dry. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to slick it out with the sponge 6-inch knife. I'm going to run some plastic or masking machine on the ceiling. I don't want to get this texture on the ceiling. We already got the plastic on the side. I got plastic on the side, plastic on the bottom. So we're going to spray texture this whole area. I would say this is a heavy orange peel splatter texture. It's a spray texture. So we're just going to spray this whole area so it's one nice patched wall area. Basically half the wall is going to be textured. Wash up your second coat tools. I don't think I'm going to need a third coat, so I'm going to go ahead and wash up these tools really good because I'm going to put them away once I'm done with them. Nice and clean. Notice it's not all caked up with mud because I clean my tools when I'm done with them. Hands, same thing. Any mud in the washout areas, you can just kind of thin it down with water and make it disappear. It's gypsum, so it's not going to really hurt any plants. Any white residue you can follow through and rinse it off with water. It is water-soluble materials when it's wet, so it's easier to do it while the materials are still wet. I don't need my coating knife, I don't need my pan, I will need my 6-inch knife for the next step. I'm done with my pans and knife, so I'm going to put those away for now to get them out of the way. I don't need any more coating mud, so I keep a lid on my hot mud so I don't want water dropping in. I'll need a sponge, and then we're going to do the texture. A lot of guys have special texture stands for their hoppers so they can dump mud in, but look at there, that texture stand is free. This is a splatter texture, it's not a knockdown, so I like to strain my muds. So I do carry a strainer. It's kind of a spaghetti strainer. What that does, it kind of strains the mud. It gets any boogers, because even though the mud's mixed up, sometimes you'll get boogers and clumps in it. So what the strainer does, it strains out any boogers and clumps, so when you spray the texture, you don't get little rocks and blemishes in your texture because you strain the materials. It's a heavier mud. That's okay. I'm going to be spraying it at a heavier pressure. I spray it at full pressure. Just tap it in. If you do have to thin down your mud, you can thin it down, but I don't want the spray texture too thin, because you can just spray it at a heavy PSI and get the same design. Spray textures are tricky though. You do want to practice with them until you get a perfect design. Now that's ready. I don't need much texture because I'm just spraying a patch. This I can wash up. My muds. I always scrape the sides of my muds. I scrape the sides of the edges, and I just take a sponge, clean off the sides. I have another job after this, so I'm not going to put a water on it, but if I'm done for the day, I'm going to put a little bit of water on it and put the lid on it. I'm going to keep the bucket out just in case there's extra mud in here, so I can dump the extra mud back in the bucket. Clean my sponge. We're going to go in there and mask off the ceiling and wait till the second coat's fully dry, and we're going to slick it out, and then we're going to do the spray splatter texture. So go ahead and get my masking machine ready, everything's ready. So I only come out here one time, texture it out, and the next time I come back out here is when I'm finished. So hopper with my texture, my masking, sponge, 6-inch knife. Let's go ahead and finish this patch up. Alright, mask your ceilings. Ready, make sure it's full of air. Turn it on, fill up the tanks with air. Alright, slicking out first coat, this second coat. Alright, slick out second coat, same thing, get rid of the edges. This is just a damp sponge, it's not soaking wet. I'm just adding a little bit of material, moisture to the patch, slick out. This is almost turning into a fourth coat now. I'm taking the extra mud off. Any blemishes, you can cross it off the opposite direction. Take your extra mud. Alright, texture. Hopper, spray hose. I like to turn it on full blast and spray a little bit of texture on the plastic to dial in your area until you get the consistency you're looking for. Try to match what's on the wall. This one's going to need higher pressure, so opened up more. I can see water on the wall, so I'm going to have to let this dry because it doesn't like to stick to water. So we'll just let it dry. Give it a couple minutes. As you can tell, I sprayed this and it's really heavy. If you're not happy with your spray work, better now than never, take it off. Take it off. This will almost act like another tight coat. I'm going to have to turn up the pressure more on this or thin down the mud to get a thinner texture. Also, remember how I said the tips? It was spraying heavier so I can switch it to a smaller tip. That's why you want to test it until you get fully committed in spraying. So now I'm going to switch it with a small tip that we hardly ever use, but we're going to use it on this one. These are all my different tips through the years doing drywall. That's a small tip there. Make sure we got plenty of air and start over. We're going to try the smaller tip to get a smaller dot. That one was spraying a little heavy. Because the mud was heavy, I could have thinned down the mud, but instead I'm going to switch out the tip. Same thing here, full pressure, test it on the plastic. That's better. Alright, got it all textured. Look at that.